It's another great day of politics and religion here at Endtime Ministries, and we want to talk a little bit today about Israel. Most of you that listen to this program are very affectionate toward Israel. You believe that God's people should bless Israel. The Bible tells us that whoever blesses the descendants of Abraham will be blessed. Whoever curses them will be cursed. This doesn't mean that the nation of Israel is infallible. We also do believe that the present rebirth of the nation of Israel that came to pass on May the 14th of 1948 is a divine fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Chapters 36 and 37 of the book of Ezekiel foretell the rebirth of the nation of Israel that has now come to pass. Chapter number 38 also talks about Israel, only in a different light. It talks about the coming battle of Armageddon. So since we believe that God is working in the earth, we have special affection toward Israel. Israel's relation with the United States is not like the relations of any other nation on the earth. No other. We have a special relationship with Israel, and most Christians, especially Bible-believing Christians, think that that's the way it should be. Now, there are those Christians who believe in what's called replacement theology. Now, they are almost 180-degree opposite in their belief. They believe that the Jews crucified Jesus, and therefore the last 2,000 years of persecution, including Hitler's Holocaust, was their just reward for the misdeeds that they did. And therefore, there are people who believe that God no longer deals with Israel at all, that Israel has been replaced with the church, that the church is the true Israel, and that we should have no special relationship with Israel at all. Some of the major denominations have actually disinvested all of their pension funds with the nation of Israel. They will not have anything to do with produce that's produced in the West Bank. They are anti-Israeli. So there are two extremes here. I will tell you exactly where I stand. I love the nation of Israel. I've been there every year for the last 20 years. I absolutely believe that God will turn back to the nation of Israel again. I do believe presently most Israelis find themselves in an antichrist position in that they have rejected Jesus as the Messiah. And so presently they are in a situation of unbelief, which the Bible prophesied that they would be, but that, the Apostle Paul talked about it in Romans chapter number 11. He said, I would not have you to be ignorant of this mystery, brethren, lest you should become wise in your own conceits, or in your own conceitedness. That blindness in part hath happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. So this situation where the Gentiles were first in blindness, and then the Jews at that time were God's chosen people, then God turned from them to the Gentiles to take out a people for his namesake, as the scripture says. The Jewish scriptures of the Old Testament actually say that. And so now then is the Gentile dispensation, and yet the Bible says, don't be ignorant of this, that the blindness in part hath happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in, yet all Israel shall be saved. Well, we're on the brink now of the switching of God back to the Jewish people, just like the prophecy says, and the rebirth of the nation of Israel is already a precursor to that particular development. So with all that said, there's a lot of discussion about the different candidates and their position toward Israel today. It is generally believed that to become president of the United States, it's almost mandatory that you win the Jewish vote, to say nothing of Jewish financial support. So we want to talk about where the different candidates stand and exactly what they believe. It's one thing to say you believe one thing. It's another thing to actually find out what you do. So to begin with today, let's take a look, because there was an article that came out concerning Newt Gingrich's flip-flopping on the Middle East. Now, he has a very good friend by the name of Sheldon Adelson. He is a billionaire, one of the richest people in the world, and he is very much a backer of Newt Gingrich. As of right now, he and his wife have donated to the Gingrich campaign in the neighborhood of $10 million. A lot. So when you talk about $10 million donated, obviously that's a strong level of support, and a lot of people think that it has caused Gingrich to alter some of his policies. Newt Gingrich has actually said that once he becomes president, he will move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. We know that the United Nations has said Israel cannot have Jerusalem as its capital because the international community has not granted such. We know that back in 1947, when the United Nations put forth a proposal to partition. It was a proposal, by the way. It was not a mandate. It was a proposal to partition the Holy Land. They gave part to Israel. They gave part to the Palestinians, but they didn't make a decision on what to do. Well, they did make a decision, but they didn't put Jerusalem under the control of the Israelis or the Palestinians. They made Jerusalem an international entity under the control of the United Nations. Consequently, the UN to this day claims that it should have control of Jerusalem. Now, when the Palestinians and all the Arabs refused the proposal of the United Nations and opted for war instead, the boundaries have all been drawn by war from that time on. Israel accepted the proposal of the UN, but then was forced into a war by the Arabs who attacked her. Now, then the same Arabs are complaining because Israel won't go back to those boundaries which the Arabs refused to accept. Now, that's the facts of life the way they absolutely are. Well, in the meantime, though, Israel, when the 1949 ceasefire was declared between Israel and Jordan, Jordan controlled half of Jerusalem, eastern Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount, and Israel controlled West Jerusalem. Well, it went on that way from 1949 until 1967. In 1967, when the Six-Day War broke out, when Nasser blockaded the Straits of Tehran and also actually ordered out the UN troops which were there to separate Egypt from Israel, and the UN obeyed. They left, and then Egypt moved its troops up to the southern border of Israel. Well, it was pretty obvious what Nasser's intention was. He thought he was ready to drive Israel into the sea. So Israel was forced to defend herself. The Six-Day War broke out, not only from the south with Egypt, but then Syria from the north, and then King Hussein of Jordan jumped in from the east. And when the dust cleared 6 days later, Israel had defeated all of her Arab enemies and had expanded her borders to close to the proximity of Promised Land borders as they are presented in the Bible. Well, right at that time, immediately after 1967, Israel said, if you will make peace with us, if you will negotiate with us, make peace with us, we will give you all the land back. You sign a peace treaty, we will live together in peace and tranquility in the Middle East. However, they had their famous conference at Khartoum, and out of Khartoum came the three famous no's: no recognition, no negotiation, no peace. And that's come down now as the three famous no's of Khartoum that were perpetrated by the Arabs. Well, consequently, the status quo has been locked in from 1967 until the present time. The UN says that Israel should trade land for peace. The UN did not say that Israel should give all the land. The UN specifically said that final borders between Israel and the Palestinian entity should be negotiated. Now remember, the Palestinians did not control any of this territory. The UN tried to give it to them. They refused. The Jordanian army controlled the territory from 1949 to 1967. Then the Jordanian army decided they would attack Israel. Israel called, when the war broke out in the south with Egypt and the north with Syria, Israel called King Hussein of Jordan and said, if you'll stay out, we will not bother you. But Jordan aggressively launched an attack against the nation of Israel. Israel counterattacked in a defensive war, and as a result swept all the way to the Jordan River and reunited the city of Jerusalem. Now, those are the historical facts. However, The UN says we do not recognize Israel's right to its capital in Jerusalem. There were two nations up until about 5 years or so ago that had their capitals in Jerusalem. All other nations put their, I said that wrong. They had their embassies in Jerusalem. All other nations had their embassies in Tel Aviv to show that it was not recognized that Israel should control the city of Jerusalem. The United States of America had an office in Jerusalem. Matter of fact, all of them do, because there's nothing going on in Tel Aviv. The government offices of Israel are in Jerusalem. It's their capital. However, to keep up the delusion that Jerusalem is not Israel's capital, they all put their embassies up in Tel Aviv, but they all have other offices in Jerusalem that they conduct all the business with the government of Israel out of, because that's where the government of Israel is located. The Knesset is there. That's like their parliament. Well, anyway, the United States of America bought a beautiful plot of land to build our embassy upon when the time came. Finally, I think it was 1995 or so, that Newt Gingrich was talked to by Benjamin Netanyahu, who was at that time in the opposition of the Israeli government, and Netanyahu urged him to actually move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. Well, Gingrich, being the Speaker of the House at the time, helped push through a law to move the embassy to Jerusalem. However, he, Bob Dole, and others left the president an out. If it was deemed that it would be a threat to the national security of the United States of America to take this action, then the president may put off the action to move the embassy to Jerusalem. Now, it's a law. We're supposed to have our embassy in Jerusalem. But we left the president this out. If you think it will endanger national security, you may come before the Congress and say it will endanger national security. We postpone this move for the next 6 months. So Bill Clinton, every 6 months, dutifully went before the Congress. It will be a threat to national security. We are not moving our embassy. That went on every 6 months, every 6 months. Then George W. Bush was running for office as the Republican candidate, and he said, the day of my inauguration, I will move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. Well, he was inaugurated twice. No embassy to Jerusalem. Every 6 months, he came before the Congress. It would endanger national security to move the embassy to Jerusalem. Now Barack Obama's picked up the same thing. Now he comes every 6 months and says, we can't move the embassy yet. Well, we'll be back.